My golden child brother blew our parents' retirement on a fake startup and framed me as a thief, so I cut them off and uncovered a dark basement secret. I am a 31-year-old male who grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in Ohio, one of those places with decent schools and friendly neighbors. My dad worked as an electrical engineer at a manufacturing plant, and my mom was a part-time receptionist at a dental office. We weren't rich, but we weren't struggling either. We took modest vacations to nearby lakes in the summer, had 2 reliable cars, and never worried about groceries or bills. That is, until my brother, a 27-year-old named Timmy, came along and somehow became the center of the universe from literally day one. He was the golden child. I am not even exaggerating. I had to get perfect grades, mow the lawn every weekend, shovel snow all winter, and basically be a mini adult while this kid could do whatever he wanted with 0 consequences. I remember asking my mom once when I was about 10 why Timmy did not have to clean his room when I had to keep mine spotless. She gave me this annoyed look and said, "He is still young. You should be responsible since you are older." That became the theme of my childhood. I was the strong one who could handle endless responsibilities, while Timmy was sensitive and needed to be protected from any expectations whatsoever. Growing up, our house had these weird, unspoken rules. For example, if I forgot to take out the trash, I would lose my video game privileges for a week. If Timmy refused to do his chores entirely, my parents would say, "He is just being a kid," or "He is going through a phase." By 6th grade, I was making my own lunches, doing my own laundry, and basically taking care of myself. Timmy at 9 still had Mom cutting the crust off his sandwiches and laying out his clothes for him every morning. I would get home from school and immediately start homework, while Timmy would play video games until dinner. When I asked if I could play too, Mom would say, "You have responsibilities first," as if Timmy somehow did not. I still remember when I was 13 and saved up for months from my paper route to buy a gaming console. I dragged myself out of bed at 5 in the morning to deliver papers before school, rain or shine, skipped hanging out with friends, passed on snacks, and saved every dollar to save up the $299 plus tax for that console. I will never forget the feeling of walking into the store, counting out that money I had earned through actual work, and carrying that box home. I was flying high. It felt like the first time I had ever owned something valuable that was truly mine. I set it up in the living room, played for maybe 2 hours, and went to bed feeling proud of myself. The next day, Timmy threw a tantrum, and my parents made me share it with him. It ended up in his room, and I had to ask to use the console I paid for. When I pushed back, my dad hit me with, "We do not value material things. We share with family." Easy to say when it is not your stuff being taken. This was my entire childhood on repeat. Within 3 weeks, Timmy had broken 2 controllers and scratched several games. When I complained, Mom said, "You need to be patient with him." He was 9 years old, not a toddler, but in their eyes, he was a baby who could not be held accountable for anything. There was this other time in high school when I won an academic competition and got a $500 scholarship. I was part of the robotics team, and we built an automated sorting system that impressed the judges. The award ceremony was on a Tuesday evening, and neither of my parents showed up because Timmy had a recreational soccer game that apparently could not be missed. I got a ride home from my teacher, clutching the certificate and feeling both proud and invisible. When I showed them the scholarship, my mom's first response was not "congratulations." It was, "Oh, that is perfect timing. Timmy was just saying he needs a new laptop for school." My parents somehow convinced me that putting it toward Timmy's new laptop was what a good big brother would do, because your brother needs it for school, and you will get a scholarship for college anyway. They made it seem like I was being selfish for even hesitating. I remember standing in the store watching, as Timmy picked out a laptop with specs way beyond what any middle schooler needed for homework, adding on gaming accessories that were not remotely educational. My scholarship covered about half, and my parents paid the rest. Timmy did not even thank me. He acted like it was his birthright to get this gift. My high school years were basically me busting my butt, honor roll, track team captain, working at the local hardware store on weekends. Meanwhile, Timmy spent high school getting high, skipping classes, and barely passing. My parents always defended him, saying he just needs to find his path. By senior year, I had this routine down: excel at everything, get minimal recognition, watch Timmy fail upward with maximum praise. I got into a decent state university with a partial scholarship. My parents' contribution was, "We will help when we can, but college is expensive." I ended up working 30 hours a week at a campus bookstore, while taking a full course load, living off ramen and energy drinks. College was a grind. I shared a cramped apartment with 3 guys, worked every break, and lived off budget meals. No spring breaks, no extras, just survive and move forward. My social life basically consisted of free campus events and hanging out in people's dorm rooms. Timmy tried college twice, not at state schools, but at expensive private universities. My parents somehow found the money for him. He dropped out both times, within the first semester, with some excuse like, "The curriculum is too restrictive for my learning style," or whatever pretentious stuff he came up with. The first time they paid for an $18,000 per semester liberal arts college because Timmy claimed he wanted to study film. 3 months later, he was back home because the professors did not understand artistic vision, and college stifles creativity. Instead of questioning him, my parents consoled him about how the education system fails innovative thinkers like him. A year later, they paid for another private university, this time for business, because Timmy suddenly decided he was an entrepreneur. That lasted about 2 months before he quit, because the program was too focused on traditional business models and not on disruptive thinking. Again, my parents completely bought his story. After graduating with my computer science degree, I landed an entry-level software development job. The pay was not amazing, $58,000 a year, but it was a start. I lived with 2 roommates in a small apartment, drove a 15-year-old Honda, and saved every penny I could. I was determined to build financial security after years of struggling through college. Meanwhile, Timmy never kept a job for more than a few months. Barista quit because customers are stupid. Retail quit because the manager was on a power trip. Warehouse quit because manual labor was beneath his intelligence. This whole time, he was living rent-free at my parents' house, driving a car they bought him while they covered his phone, insurance, and even gave him spending money at 25 years old. When I visited home, Timmy would go on about his big ideas like he was the next Elon Musk, treating me like some boring office guy. My parents just nodded along, totally buying it. If I suggested he get a real job, they would jump in with how he was a visionary who just needed the right chance. I remember bringing home my girlfriend, now ex, for Christmas. One year after dinner, she cornered me and said, "Your brother has been talking about himself for 3 hours. And your parents are eating it up like he is giving a TED talk." She saw in one evening what I had experienced my entire life. 3 years into my career, I had moved up to senior developer, making about $85,000. I had built up an emergency fund and was looking at maybe buying a small condo. During this time, I occasionally helped my parents with unexpected expenses, fixing their roof after a storm, replacing their fridge when it died, normal stuff you do for family. Around this time, my cousin Jacob, my dad's brother's son, moved to our city after graduating college. We reconnected and became pretty close. Jacob worked in finance and was the first family member to actually be impressed by what I had accomplished. He was also the only one in the family who saw through Timmy's nonsense and understood my frustration. One night over drinks, Jacob said something that stuck with me. "You know, your parents created this monster, right? It is not just that they favor Timmy. They have literally trained him to be this way." It was so obvious once he said it, but I had been too close to see it clearly. Then came last year when my parents called me, sounding devastated. They had made the most insane decision ever. They had taken a second mortgage on their fully paid house and emptied their entire 401ks to give Timmy $160,000 for some revolutionary app idea that would disrupt the social media space. I am not kidding, $160,000 to Timmy, who had zero coding experience, zero business knowledge, and could not even hold down a job at a coffee shop. I tried everything to stop this train wreck. I even brought my buddy from work, who had previously worked at a tech startup, to explain why Timmy's big ideas were total garbage. My friend Kevin sat them down and went through all the issues. No unique selling proposition, no technical expertise, no market research, no business plan, nothing that would make this app viable. He showed them statistics about startup failure rates and tried to explain why giving someone with no experience that much money was a recipe for disaster. They just dismissed us, saying I was jealous of Timmy's entrepreneurial vision and that I was too risk-averse to understand innovation. My mom actually said, "Sometimes the people closest to success are the least able to see it." Timmy has always been able to think outside the box in ways you cannot. When I pressed for details about this revolutionary app idea, it turned out to be a social platform where people could share emotions through color patterns or some nonsense. When I pointed out that multiple apps like this already existed and had failed, my dad said, "That is because they did not have Timmy's unique perspective. I nearly lost it right there." I left that night knowing I had failed to protect them, but also realizing there was nothing I could, said, or done to change their minds. They were determined to believe in Timmy's genius, regardless of all evidence to the contrary. In the months that followed, Timmy would send me smug texts about finally getting the support he needed to succeed, and how some people get their big break from rich investors. But family investment is even better because they believe in you. The audacity of this guy treating our parents' retirement as his personal venture capital fund made my blood boil. Surprise, surprise. His revolutionary app crashed and burned within 8 months. He never even hired a real developer or filed proper business paperwork. The money went to a leased BMW, which he later wrecked, an office space that was really just a fancy apartment where he lived, expensive electronics, and what he called networking events, but were basically just parties with his loser friends. When I say he did not hire a developer, I mean he literally expected to launch an app without anyone coding it. His plan was to outsource to India, but he never actually found a legitimate development team. He just joined some freelancer site and paid for bits and pieces of code that never came together into anything functional. One weekend, about 4 months into his startup journey, he actually called me asking for help. He had apparently spent $15,000 on various coding snippets and could not figure out why they would not work together. Being a software developer myself, I reluctantly agreed to look at what he had. What I found was an absolute disaster. Pieces of code in different programming languages that could not possibly work together. Some parts for Android, others for iOS, with no clear architecture or data model. When I tried to explain why this would not work, he got defensive, saying I was too traditional in my thinking and that he was innovating. When I suggested he might need to hire a technical CEO founder who actually understood software development, he accused me of trying to take over his company and stormed out. A month later, he called my parents, claiming he had found a genius developer who could fix everything for just another $20,000. They called me asking if this sounded legitimate. I spent an hour explaining why throwing more money at this disaster would not help, only to have my mom say, "Well, I think we should trust Timmy's instincts on this. He has always been good with technology." I nearly threw my phone across the room. The business meetings he was always talking about. Jacob's friend saw Timmy at an expensive restaurant with a group of his friends, all of them ordering top-shelf everything while Timmy paid the bill. He told Jacob they were discussing market strategy, but they were just partying on my parents' dime. Jacob's friend even snapped a discreet photo that showed Timmy's business partners, a bunch of guys our age, clearly wasted, with not a laptop or notebook in sight. The whole time, Timmy was posting on Instagram about his entrepreneur journey and startup grind, sharing photos of himself in fancy coffee shops with a laptop open to what looked like code, which Jacob's developer friend later told me was just random programming screenshots from Google. He was creating this whole fake narrative of being a hard-working tech founder while blowing through my parents' retirement. When the money inevitably ran out, Timmy ghosted his freelancers, stopped paying rent on his office, and defaulted on the BMW lease. He came home with some sob story about market conditions and investor timing, claiming the business had been on the verge of success. But forces beyond his control had intervened. My parents ate it up, acting like he was some tragic hero instead of an incompetent fraud. My parents were freaking out about losing their house. Despite being angry at their stupid decision, I could not let them be homeless in their 60s. So, as a good son or idiot, I stepped in and started paying their mortgage, $1,700 a month, plus helping with utilities and groceries. It was taking almost 40% of my income, forcing me to put my own life plans on hold. I had been planning to propose to my girlfriend of 3 years. I had the ring picked out, had been saving for a down payment on a starter home, had everything mapped out. Instead, I was now pouring most of my disposable income into keeping my parents afloat after they had blown their safety net on Timmy's genius ideas. My girlfriend tried to be understanding, but the strain of constantly postponing our future led to more and more arguments. The condo I had been saving for was gone. The vacation I had planned with my girlfriend was canceled. My plans to go back for a master's degree were postponed indefinitely. I was working overtime and taking on freelance projects on weekends just to make ends meet, while Timmy somehow still had money for new clothes and nights out with friends. My relationship suffered from financial stress and eventually ended when my ex got tired of every date night turning into a discussion about my family problems. The final straw came when we had to cancel our anniversary dinner that I had been planning for months because my parents suddenly needed emergency dental work that their insurance would not fully cover. My girlfriend finally said, "I feel like I am dating your whole family, not just you." And she was right. We broke up a week later. The worst part, despite their panic over potentially losing their house, my parents still would not acknowledge that Timmy had scammed them. They kept saying the business just needed more time or that the market was not ready for such an innovative concept. It was like they physically could not admit he had blown through their retirement on nothing. My dad, who had always been financially conservative his whole life, the man who would drive across town to save 5 cents per gallon on gas, was suddenly talking like a Silicon Valley venture capitalist, using terms like burn rate and pivoting that he clearly did not understand. My mom had started referring to Timmy as a visionary in conversation, as if his complete failure was somehow proof of his superior insight rather than his incompetence. During one Sunday dinner, which I was still attending out of some misplaced sense of duty, Timmy actually had the nerve to talk about his next big idea, some nonsense about artificial intelligence-powered pet toys, while sitting at the table in the house I was now paying for. When I asked how he planned to fund this brilliant concept, he looked at me expectantly. That is when I realized they all assumed I would be the new investor now that my parents were tapped out. Meanwhile, Timmy, showing what a great son he is, moved in with some girl he had been dating for like 3 weeks and barely contacted them, except to ask for more money for his Phase 2 funding round. Like, are you serious, dude? Every time I would visit, my parents would make excuses for why Timmy could not come over or call them. He is so busy networking, or he is in intense development meetings. The reality, which I later found out from Jacob, was that Timmy was avoiding them because he knew they were broke and could not give him more money. Things got weird about 4 months ago when my parents started asking for extra money for urgent home repairs. First, $800 for plumbing issues, then $1,200 for electrical problems, then another $900 for something else. When I asked for contractor quotes, they got all sketchy and would not give me details. Jacob had stopped by their house to drop off some stuff his dad wanted them to have, and texted me that something seemed off. He said the house looked messy, which was unusual for my mom, who was always obsessively clean, and there were people he did not recognize hanging around. Also, he noticed my dad seemed really nervous and kept trying to rush him out. Jacob overheard someone in another room talking about product quality and moving inventory, which seemed strange for a supposed tech business. What really concerned Jacob was the state of my parents. My mom, who had always been well put together, looked exhausted and was wearing clothes that had not been washed. My dad, who was normally talkative with family, barely spoke and kept glancing nervously toward the basement. Jacob texted me, "Dude, something weird is going on there. Either your brother is running some kind of scam or your parents are being taken advantage of." That weekend, I decided to drive over unannounced. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed 3 cars I did not recognize parked haphazardly on the lawn, tearing up the grass my dad had always meticulously maintained. The mailbox was overflowing, and there were fast food containers scattered across the porch. Before I even entered, I could hear loud music and shouting from inside. What I found when I walked in was way worse than I ever imagined, a complete nightmare. Timmy had moved back in with his girlfriend and 4 unemployed friends. They had absolutely trashed my parents' once nice home. The front yard, which my dad used to meticulously maintain, was overgrown with weeds. There were cigarette butts all over the porch, empty energy drink cans, and fast food bags scattered everywhere. The flower beds my mom had lovingly tended for years were trampled and dying. Someone had backed a car into the garage door, leaving a huge dent. When I walked in, the smell hit me first, a mix of unwashed clothes, old food, and what I strongly suspected were illegal substances. There was this thick haze in the air, and my eyes actually started watering. I could hear shouting and laughing from multiple rooms, music blasting from at least 2 different sources. The living room looked like a war zone. The couch was burned and stained with holes punched in half the walls. The coffee table was trashed, pizza boxes stacked in corners, and the carpet so filthy I could not tell what color it used to be. The kitchen was worse. Piles of dishes, rotten food, a fridge full of energy drinks, and expired junk. The stand mixer my mom loved was ruined. Counters were scorched and gouged, and the cabinets my dad had built were hanging off the hinges. Trash was shoved behind appliances like no one had even tried to clean. But the worst part was seeing my parents, the actual homeowners, literally living in the small guest room. While these losers had taken over the main house, all their personal belongings had been crammed into that tiny space. The room that had once been for occasional visitors was now their only private space in the home they had spent 30 years paying for. I found my dad sitting alone in the kitchen, looking defeated, while my mom was making food for Timmy and his crew. She was cooking a full meal for these people who were treating her home like a dump. The people who had worked their entire lives to build this home were now essentially servants in it. When Timmy saw me, he did not even seem embarrassed. He just nodded like I was some delivery guy and went back to talking loudly with his friends, his girlfriend, A girl I had never met, who looked to be about 19, was sitting on the kitchen counter, her shoes on the surface, where food was prepared, scrolling through her phone and ignoring everyone. None of them acknowledged my parents or offered to help with the food preparation. When I confronted them, they first tried to act like everything was fine. Oh, Timmy and his friends are just staying temporarily while they work on their next startup. But when I pressed harder, showing them the damage to their own home, they broke down. They admitted they had been giving all the emergency repair money to Timmy for another business venture, some drop shipping scheme he swore would make millions. Same old nonsense, but this time with my money. My mom said he just needs a little more time and support. His first business was so close to succeeding, and this one is even better thought out. I could not believe what I was hearing. How could they still believe his lies after everything? I asked about the damage to the house, and my dad just stared at the floor while my mom made excuses. Young people are just more energetic. It is just stuff. It can be replaced. We do not mind. Family is more important than things. I was beyond furious. I told them I would not support them financially anymore if they kept enabling Timmy's destructive behavior. I thought stupidly that maybe the threat of losing their financial lifeline would finally wake them up. Their response showed exactly where I stood in the family hierarchy. Instead of acknowledging the problem, they turned on me completely. My mom said I was just angry because Timmy was brave enough to pursue his dreams while I played it safe with my boring coding job. My dad was even worse, saying, "Blood is thicker than water," and "real family does not come with conditions." Then he had the nerve to say, "We have always treated you boys equally." I nearly lost it hearing that garbage. The most delusional part came when my mom started talking about how Timmy was providing them with an opportunity to be part of something special, as if living in a single room of their trashed house while supporting freeloaders was some kind of privilege. I looked around at their beloved home, the home they had spent 30 years building and maintaining, the home they had remortgaged for Timmy's failed business, now destroyed. And I realized they would sacrifice everything, absolutely everything, before they would admit the truth about their golden child. I gave them an ultimatum: either Timmy and his freeloading friends move out, or I stopped paying their bills. I expected them to at least consider it, to weigh their options, to think about the fact that I was literally keeping a roof over their heads. They chose Timmy without even thinking about it. My mom called me heartless for trying to kick out my brother when he was on the verge of his big break. My dad called me a terrible son for abandoning them when they needed support the most. I stood in their wrecked living room, looked at these people who had raised me but never really seen me, and something finally broke. I told them they had made their choice, and now they would have to live with it. I would not be sending another penny. My mom's parting words as I left were, "You have always been jealous of your brother. I thought you would outgrow it, but I guess some people just cannot stand to see others succeed." The delusion was complete, and there was nothing left to say. So I did what I should have done years ago. I cut them off completely, blocked their numbers, and stopped paying their bills. I told Jacob what happened, and he completely supported my decision. He said, "They have made their bed with Timmy. Now they can lie in it." The first week after cutting them off was surprisingly peaceful. No more dread when the phone rang, no more stress about where I would find the money for their next emergency. But the peace did not last long. About 3 weeks after I cut them off, Jacob called me, sounding really concerned. He had been at a family gathering and discovered something that made my blood boil. Timmy had been spreading vicious lies about me to our entire extended family for months. He created this elaborate story about how I supposedly embezzled $250,000 from the software company I worked for and was fired, but avoided jail time because my parents paid restitution using their 401ks. According to his lies, my stolen money was running out, and I was trying to force them to kick Timmy out so I could sell their house before I went broke. He portrayed himself as this protective son, shielding our elderly parents from their criminal son. It was completely insane. I had literally just gotten a promotion at work, and anyone who knew me understood I was pathologically honest. I would not even take office supplies home. The worst part, my parents were supporting his lies. When relatives asked them directly about my alleged theft, they would say things like how deeply disappointed they were in my poor choices and how Timmy was helping them recover emotionally from what I had done. My own parents were helping destroy my reputation to maintain their fantasy of Timmy as the good son. Jacob showed me screenshots from the family group chat where relatives were calling me a thief and saying I belonged in prison. One aunt wrote, "I always knew there was something off about him, too quiet, too secretive with his computer job." An uncle commented, "The apple does not fall far from the tree. His father's brother was always shifty too," referring to Jacob's dad, who is actually one of the most honest people I know. My grandparents, who I had always been close with, were asking if they should file police reports since I had stolen from them too. Another complete lie Timmy had invented. Even cousins I had helped with coding projects and job referrals were turning against me. Jacob was furious. He tried defending me in the chat, but was shut down by Timmy, who said Jacob was probably involved in the embezzlement too. It was like watching a cult in action. Timmy had somehow convinced everyone that his failures were my fault, and my parents were backing him 100%. That night, I could not sleep. I kept thinking about how my entire family history was being rewritten, how years of hard work and sacrifice were being twisted into a criminal narrative. Something in me hardened. I decided if they wanted a villain, I would show them what a real villain could do. I was ready to go nuclear. I spent a weekend gathering every piece of evidence I could find, years of bank statements showing every payment I had made to support my parents, texts from Timmy bragging about blowing through their retirement, emails from my parents begging for money, and photos of the destruction in their house. I created a folder on my computer labeled The Truth and organized everything meticulously. I even created a timeline showing the progression of events from Timmy's first business idea through my parents emptying their 401ks to the current state of their home. I calculated exactly how much money I had given them over the past year. $32,147.83. That was more than a third of my post-tax income, gone to enable Timmy's lifestyle. I wrote an initial draft of an email to send to the family, but as I reread it, I realized how insane the whole situation would sound to outsiders. Would people really believe that my successful, seemingly rational parents had given their life savings to their deadbeat son for a nonsensical app idea? Would they understand how these intelligent people could be so blind when it came to Timmy? It sounded unbelievable even to me, and I had lived through it. As I reviewed all the evidence, I realized it would not be enough. These people had already shown they would believe Timmy's lies over obvious reality. My mother, who used to be a sharp-minded woman who could spot a scam a mile away, had somehow convinced herself that Timmy was the next Steve Jobs. My father, who had been a practical, no-nonsense engineer his whole life, was now making excuses for obvious failure. I needed something they could not ignore or explain away. I remembered a conversation I had had with my dad about 6 months earlier when I was still trying to reason with them about Timmy. I had pointed out that Timmy had no technical skills to build an app, and my dad had waved his hand dismissively and said, "You do not understand modern business. Ideas are what matter now, not technical skills." It was like talking to a stranger wearing my dad's face. That is when I remembered something odd from my visit to my parents' house. Timmy and his friends had been extremely protective of the basement, making excuses for why no one should go down there. When I had asked Timmy about using the basement storage for some of my parents' things that were cluttering their tiny guest room, he had gotten unusually aggressive, saying the basement was his workspace and off-limits. My dad got weirdly quiet when I brought it up, mumbled something about the garage and walked off. My mom just whispered that I should leave it alone and not stir things up. Back then, I figured they were just covering more damage. Now I was not so sure. I thought about calling the police, but what would I tell them? That my brother might be doing something illegal in my parents' basement? That my parents were enabling him? I had no proof, and they would probably dismiss it as a family dispute. Plus, if I was wrong, it would permanently destroy any chance of getting through to my parents. After talking it over with Jacob, I decided to hire a private investigator. It cost me $3,000, money I definitely could not afford to spend given how much I was already paying toward my parents' expenses. But I was desperate for something that would break through the delusion. I figured if Timmy was just freeloading and partying, the private investigator would confirm that and I would at least know for sure. And if something worse was happening, I needed to know that too. The private investigator was this retired cop named Mitch, who specialized in surveillance. He did not ask too many questions, just took the information I had and got to work. He told me it would take about 2 weeks to establish patterns and gather evidence. Then came the thing I already suspected. Within 2 weeks, Mitch had solid evidence that Timmy was not running any business. He was involved in a small-time drug trafficking operation, using my parents' house as a distribution point. Those networking events were just drug deals, and the office space he briefly rented was used for storing products. Mitch got photos of Timmy and his friends making exchanges in parking lots, documented suspicious people coming and going from my parents' house at all hours, and even managed to get some audio recordings where Timmy explicitly discussed drug sales. He had surveillance photos of Timmy meeting with known drug dealers in the area, screenshots of social media messages where Timmy was clearly arranging deals using thinly veiled code words, and evidence that the basement of my parents' house was being used as a packaging facility. What really made me sick was a recording where Timmy laughed about how his parents were clueless, and how the house was the perfect setup because no one suspects middle-aged suburbanites. He actually bragged about how he had convinced them to pay the utilities for his operation and how he had them wrapped around his finger. There was another clip where he talked about how he would blame me if they ever got caught, saying he would claim I was the mastermind who had threatened their parents. The private investigator explained that based on the patterns and volume, this was not just recreational use. This was organized distribution. Timmy was not just selling to friends or making a little side money. He had set up a proper operation with multiple people involved, regular supply deliveries, and consistent distribution channels. Mitch estimated they were moving several $1,000s worth of product weekly, based on the frequency and pattern of visitors. The most shocking part, my parents' house had become a base of operations. The basement that they were so protective of was being used to package and prepare shipments. My parents' home address was literally being used to receive packages of illegal substances. I took all this evidence, financial records, photos, and the private investigator's report to my Uncle Jacob's dad, who happened to be a retired police captain. He was horrified and helped me take everything to the current police department. The police were initially skeptical, but the evidence was compelling enough that they began their own investigation. They conducted surveillance for about a week before deciding they had enough to act. 3 days later, the police raided my parents' house. They found enough drugs to charge Timmy with intent to distribute. Apparently, he had expanded beyond just marijuana to prescription pills and other stuff. One of his loser friends immediately flipped on him to save his own butt, revealing their entire operation. Timmy got arrested along with 3 of his friends. My parents were initially detained too, but were released when it became clear they were just oblivious enablers, not active participants. The same day as the raid, I sent a detailed email to the entire extended family with all my evidence, financial records showing how I supported my parents, proof of Timmy's lies, and news articles about the drug bust, which thankfully did not name my parents. My email was direct and unapologetic. For months, you have all believed lies about me embezzling money and taking advantage of my parents. Here is the truth, with evidence to back it up. While I was working 70-plus hours a week to support my parents after they gave Timmy their retirement money, he was turning their home into a drug house. Still think I am the criminal in the family? The family response was immediate. Relatives who had believed Timmy's lies were calling me nonstop to apologize. Some were furious at my parents for enabling Timmy, while he was clearly involved in illegal activities. 2 weeks after Timmy's arrest, my parents lost their house to foreclosure. The bank inspector found not just the damage I had seen, but also evidence of a small fire in the basement from Timmy's attempts to set up some kind of drug lab, compromised structural supports where walls had been removed, and black mold throughout the house from water damage they had ignored. With nowhere to go and no one else to turn to, they called Jacob, begging him to convince me to help them. Jacob recorded the conversation where they admitted everything, how they had always favored Timmy, how they knew he was probably doing something illegal but ignored it, and how they had helped spread lies about me. When they finally reached out to me directly, showing up at my apartment unannounced, they were completely broken. My dad, who had always been proud to the point of arrogance, was in tears. My mom, who always had an excuse for Timmy, could not even look me in the eye. They begged for forgiveness, promised they would cut Timmy off completely, and asked if they could stay with me, just until they found a new place. I let them cry it out before I played Jacob's recording back to them. The look on their faces as they heard their own voices admitting how they treated me my entire life was something I will never forget. Then I told them exactly what they had told me months earlier. Real family does not come with conditions, right? Well, go ask your real family, Timmy, for help. I am sure he will be writing to you from prison any day now. I shut the door on them and have not looked back. Timmy is serving 4 to 6 years for drug trafficking. My parents are staying with a distant relative in another state. About a month into his sentence, Timmy sent me a letter from prison, 4 pages front and back, blaming me for everything. He said I ruined his future and that he had been on the verge of a 6-figure crypto deal. He asked if I could at least help with lawyer fees since you were doing so well now. I shredded it without reading past the first paragraph. As for me, my life has actually gotten way better without the financial drain of supporting them. I was able to put a down payment on a nice condo. I got another promotion at work, and Jacob and I started a small side business developing apps for local businesses that is already turning a profit. Some bridges, once burned, just cannot be rebuilt. And honestly, watching them go up in flames was the most satisfying thing I have ever experienced.